Hi, and welcome to the ASS Capacity Plus Single Site Technical Webinar. I'm Pero, and I'll be hosting this webinar today. Some general housekeeping. This webinar should last no more than an hour. You will all be muted throughout the presentation, and you can access this webinar via our YouTube channel if you've missed it or you'd like to watch it again. So this is the second webinar in the technical webinar series. We have one left, which is on Capacity Plus multi-site, so please make a note of the time and the date and be sure to join us then. So in this webinar, we will be looking at the typical use cases of Capacity Plus single site, the design considerations and fleet mapping of the system, and how to program the repeaters and the subscriber radios. So what is Capacity Plus single site? Capacity Plus single site is a tier 2 trunking solution. And by tier 2, I mean it's a simple trunking solution without any central intelligence. There's no trunking controller, there's no control channel, and all of the trunking logic is contained in the repeaters and the subscriber radios. And since there's no control channel, the system uses a rest time slot or rest channel instead. And what this means is there will always be a rest channel available on the system that would be used for making a new call. So anytime a call is made, the rest channel will be used, and the next slot along will then be allocated as the rest channel. You can have a total of 20 devices on the system. You can have up to 8 trunk repeaters, so that means 16 voice time slots and up to 12 data revert repeaters. And since this is a single site solution, you cannot connect this to any other sites. You can only have one site. And you can have up to 255 talk groups. Now, the main advantage of a Capacity Plus system is the added subscriber capacity. And what this means is, with a trunking system, all of the time slots are put in a where one of the available time slots will be allocated to a call dynamically. So you are no longer tied to a slot 1 or a slot 2 of a certain repeater. All of the slots become transparent. And when a call is made, any of the available slots will be allocated to a call. And this means you can also have a greater number of radios that can effectively utilize the system compared to a conventional radio system. So if, for instance, you have a site with 3 repeaters with 6 time slots and they operate in conventional mode, you would generally have 6 talk groups on that system. On a Capacity Plus system, because the channels are trunked and you have a pool of all of the slots available, it's much more efficient in using a greater number of talk groups. So this efficiency is achieved by sharing a pool of channels for a large number of users, as I've just said. Groups are not locked to a specific TX-RX channel pair or time slot, and the system automatically assigns any available channel to a requesting user. And you will generally find, if you have a trunking system with the same number of repeaters as a conventional system, you can normally have many more talk groups that will work efficiently on the system than using a conventional system. So subscribers all have trunked channels programmed into the channel pool. With a Capacity Plus system, you do not program the channels into the normal channel zone, where you would normally do that in a conventional system. The frequencies and the channels all go in a channel pool. And these trunk channels are then added to a Capacity Plus voice list. So this is a little bit like the roam list in an IP Site Connect system, but in Capacity Plus, it's called the voice list. And this is where your radios will scan to find all of the available channels. And each channel position or personality will then reference a voice list. And this allows the subscriber to be able to access multiple Capacity Plus systems. And if you have more than one system in a radio, then each site or system would have its own voice list. And if you look at the example of a code plug here, you can see that in your channel zone, there is a section for the voice list, and you have to select the voice list for every subscriber radio. If you do not select the voice list, the radio does not know which system to access, and it won't actually allow you to program the radio. So always make sure you select the right voice list if you have more than one system in your setup. And also in the channel zone, you can see the bottom half, there is no space to add the frequencies. And as I said before, the frequencies are added into your channel pool. And we will look at this afterwards when we go through some of the code plugs and the examples to show this more clearly. But as with any programming of subscriber radios, you do need to select a contact name and your RX group list. And the rest of the settings are the same as before. The only difference in a Capacity Plus system is the admit criteria has to be polite. So you cannot be impolite or select always under admit criteria because the system won't allow you. And that's a good thing because that means you won't be able to transmit over another user. Now if we look at the Capacity Plus voice list, this is where you add all of your repeaters as members in the voice list. So once you've added your channels in your channel pool, all of the channels will show up under the available section on the left-hand side. You then need to make these repeaters members of the voice list, and you have to add them to the right-hand side. And you'll notice that in the red box, the members are there, and on the right-hand side, you can see there's a column called IDs. And this is important because in a Capacity Plus trunking system, because there's no central intelligence, you need to tell the system in which order the repeaters are located in the system. And we'll look at this as well in the repeater programming. But every repeater needs to be given a slot ID. So the first repeater in the system will be allocated with slot IDs 1 and 2. The second repeater with slot IDs 3 and 4, then 5 and 6, 7 and 8, and so on. And that's why I've named my repeaters accordingly. So the first repeater is called CP, which is Capacity Plus, and then 1 plus 2, 3 plus 4, 5 plus 6, and so on. If you get the repeaters if you add them in the wrong order, then the system will not work properly because it expects to see the repeaters in the correct order according to the IDs. So we will look at this afterwards. Now here's a troubleshooting exercise, something that you might have come across if you have worked with Capacity Plus. If you haven't, then you might not be able to spot the mistake, but a customer is experiencing an issue with one radio in a Capacity Plus single-site system. All the other radios are transmitting and receiving while one portable radio is getting an out-of-range message. The radio is not transmitting or receiving. It has been updated to the latest software version, and when making a private call or sending a text message, other calling radios cannot reach this one. So I know it's a little small, but hopefully you can see in the diagram there or in the screenshot, there's a mistake. And see if you can spot it. I'll give it a minute or so. If you spot it, write it down, and we will go through the answer at the end. So talking about the rest channel, upon power up, the subscriber scans the list of channels in the voice list assigned to the current channel selector position, looking for the rest channel. And this is always the case for a Capacity Plus subscriber radio. So when you switch the radio on, the first thing it will do is it will go into the voice list and then try and find a repeater that's online. Typically the repeater that's on the rest time slot. And if a subscriber radio doesn't hear the beacon messages, it transmits wake-up messages to the repeaters in its voice list until it finds the current rest channel or rest time slot. So the radio will listen out for beacons from the rest channel in the system. And by default, the beacon intervals are set quite low on a Capacity Plus system. So every 2 seconds, the rest channel will broadcast a beacon message, and the subscriber radio listens out for this beacon. And as soon as it receives the beacon, it will then sit idle on the rest channel, and it will be ready to be used on the system. The rest channel acquisition timeout timer in the subscriber will sound an out-of-range tone if it can't locate a rest channel before the timer expires. So let's say you switch on a Capacity Plus subscriber radio, but you're not in range of the system. It will try and connect with any of the repeaters that's in the voice list. And after the rest channel acquisition timeout timer has run out, and it still hasn't found a rest channel, the radio will then sound a beep to let the user know that you are out of range. So, as I said, when the radios are idle, all the subscribers sit on the rest channel. And when a call starts, the new rest channel is selected, and the current rest channel becomes a voice slot. And if you look at a Capacity Plus system, usually the rest channels will cycle through from the first slot of the first repeater down to the last slot of the last repeater. So it just cycles through the different time slots in the system, and that gives you the available channels that you can make calls on. So subscribers who are interested in the call will remain on that channel, and subscribers who are not part of the call will then move to the new rest channel. So every time a call is made, a new rest channel will be allocated in the system, and all the radios that are not part of the first call will then sit idle on the new rest channel. And any time slot at the site can be a rest time slot or rest channel. And when all the time slots are busy, the rest time slot will become a voice time slot. And radios that are not a party to this call will stay on the channel but remain muted. So in a tier 3 trunking system, not all of the channels can be used as voice channels. So you have a control channel that will continually transmit, and that generally cannot be used as a voice channel. But in a Capacity Plus system, even though all of the channels can be a rest channel, you can also use all of the slots as voice slots. So looking at the design and Fleetmap considerations, subscribers may access multiple systems. So you can have multiple different systems in your configuration. It can be conventional, IP site connect, Capacity Plus, single site or multi-site, etc. And it's usually a good idea to separate the different systems into their own zone. And although it's not required, it just makes it more clear, and that you don't call the wrong customer or the wrong user. So always separate them into the different zones, because if you end up with a channel zone with loads of different systems that you can select with the channel selector, and chances are you might call the wrong system or the wrong customer. So each Capacity Plus site should have its own voice list and data list. And again, you need to make sure that you reference the correct voice list in the subscriber code plug. And when programming subscribers on multiple sites, ensure that your personalities reference the correct lists. Yes. And repeaters will always be on one LAN. So the networking for Capacity Plus is very simple. All the repeaters generally sit on the same switch. You don't need a router on the system unless you want to connect to the outside world and you want to remotely administer the system, or you've got a dispatch solution like Turbonet or so on. Otherwise, if it's a standalone system with no connection to the outside world, all of the repeaters can just sit on one LAN. And this is a site topology of a capacity plus system. So here you can see there are 4 repeaters. There's one master repeater, and the same with any motor turbo system. You always have one master repeater and the rest will all be peer repeaters. These all sit on the same switch, and to that switch is also connected a host PC. And this is running RDAC in this instance, but you could have something like RM, where you can use OTAP to program radios through the system, or Turbonet, or any other application that's compatible with the system. So fleet mapping, what is fleet mapping? It's just a way to say how you are going to program the radios for a given client so that it works the best way for their solution. And the things you might be looking at is how the communications for each user group is controlled, which talk groups are assigned to certain employees, which talk groups and features and functions are assigned to dispatch control positions, and generally you'll have different permissions and features between different users. The same with IP Site Connect that we've done before. The dispatcher might have something like remote monitor, radio enable, radio disable, and these functions are usually not available to other users in the system. And then you also need to look at the features and licenses you might need for the system as a whole. So channel frequency considerations. Is it a new system? Do you have a site where a customer has got a few repeaters in conventional mode that you want to convert into a capacity plus system? If that's the case, then it's very easily done. You might need to get licenses for the repeaters to convert them to capacity plus. And you'll have to connect them together using a switch and reprogram them accordingly. This is very easily done with minimal cost, and you can turn a conventional system then into a trunking system. Are the frequencies being used new? So if you have an existing system, chances are you've got some licensed frequencies and you can reuse them. If it's a new system, you'll need to apply for new frequencies from Ofcom, and depending on where the system will be deployed will mean what frequency band you're going to use. So if you're in London or a built-up area, UHF is generally better, and if you're in an urban area, then VHF is generally better for that. And have you done propagation studies? One of the most important aspects of deploying any system. Have you made sure that you've done some coverage tests? Will the system provide adequate coverage, where it is needed for the customer? And if it is not, then that needs to be addressed before the system is deployed. And also, are there any interference issues that need to be addressed? Now, as before, generally you won't know about this until you've deployed the system. If there are interference issues, then you can always get Ofcom involved. They are generally very good at finding interference because they've got specialist equipment. Sometimes you can find that if you are in an urban area like London, where the frequency spectrum is very congested, you might have shared use of a license. So someone else might have been given the same frequency by Ofcom, and although it's interference, it's not classed as interference because it's a shared frequency or a shared license. And in that case, it could be difficult because the two users will, constantly interfere with each other, but according to Ofcom, you are abiding by, the licensing regulations. So in that case, the only thing you can really do is apply for a new frequency. So now we've come to the end of the presentation. We will also look at the subscriber code plugs and the repeater code plugs and see how it's all set up. And then by the end of that, hopefully you should have a good understanding on how a capacity plus single site system works. And hopefully you should be able to set up your own system. So next, let's look at the code plugs. So here we have the code plug of a peer repeater in a capacity plus single site system. If we go from top to bottom, we will look at all of the settings that you need to change in order for this to work as a capacity plus repeater. And if we look at the first item, the radio alias, you can call that anything you want. I've called it peer 1 because it's the first peer repeater in my system. And then you need to give it a unique radio ID. The timers can be left as default unless you need to change them for something that the customer required. You can set the TX power level, which normally should be set in accordance to your Ofcom license. And the rest there really isn't much you can set here apart from that. If we look at the network setup, as I said, the networking is very simple in capacity plus single site. You give the repeater return IP address, and because this system is a standalone system, you can really make it anything you want. It doesn't really matter as long as all of the repeaters are on the same subnet. Then that should be fine. So in this instance, I've called this, or I've given this repeater an IP address of 192.168.1.3. The gateway address is 192.168.1.1 because I do have a router on this site, and you just need to set the subnet mask. And then under link establishment, because this is a peer repeater, you will set the link type to peer. There's only 3 options there: master, peer, and none. For the master, we will set this as a master, but all of the peer repeaters will be set as peers. And you need to reference the master's IP address in this field. And as you can see, the master IP address is 192.168.1.2, and this field will be the same for all of the repeaters in the system, as well as the master UDP port, which will remain the same in these 2 settings for all of the repeaters. 50,002 is the UDP port of this peer repeater. And remember to keep the UDP ports unique for all of the repeaters in the system. Very easy to remember. If you do forget to make them unique, the system should still work, but it's good practice to keep the UDP ports unique. Then you can see we've got the peak and duration interval for an IP site connect system, which we're not interested in. Under capacity plus, this is the duration and interval that we are looking at. So as you can see, the interval is almost 2 seconds and the duration is 118 milliseconds. So what that means is the rest channel in the system will send out a beacon every 2 seconds, and that beacon will last for 180 milliseconds. And that's what the subscriber radio listens out for. So when you switch on a subscriber radio, it will be listening for this beacon. And because the beacon interval is so short, if you're in range of the system, you should pretty much, connect straight away. If you don't connect to the system straight away, then there's a good chance that there's a mistake in your code plug, the programming setup, or you're not in range of the system. Then the rest channel IP address, this needs to be unique in the system, but it needs to be the same for all of the repeaters. So you can have it on the same subnet as your other IP addresses, but this needs to be unique and it needs to be the same for all the repeaters. So in all of the other repeaters in the system, you will have the same rest channel IP and also the same rest channel UDP port. You could put this on a completely different network. It won't make a difference because the rest channel IP is just used internally to control the rest channel. And if we look at the channel setup, so in an IP side connect system, you would add a digital channel in your zone, but because this is a capacity plus system, you need to add a capacity plus channel. So if you click on the plus sign and select the type of channel, you need to select a capacity plus channel. It doesn't show here because there's already a capacity plus channel in there, which is why it only shows capacity plus linked. But if there was only a digital channel, then you should be able to select capacity plus. Now, if we look at the channel setup, because this is the first peer, you can see I've called it channel 3+4, and this comes back to what I spoke about earlier about the slot and channel ID. So in the master repeater, this will be 1+2, and the slot ID will be set to 1 and 2 because that is the first repeater in the system, and therefore it should have the first IDs of 1 and 2. This will be the second repeater in the system, so this will have slot ID 3 and 4. The next peer repeater will be on slot ID 5 and 6, and so on. So now you can see, because you select the slot ID in this section, it's a good idea to name the channel in an appropriate way, so that when you come to add it in your voice list, it will make it very easy and you won't get confused. So we will look at this in the subscriber programming afterwards. The channel preference level, you can set this from 1 to 10. All that means is if you give certain repeaters a lower preference level, then they will only be used as voice channels when all of the other channels are busy. And where you might want to use this is, let's say you have a 6 repeater capacity plus system and you know there's interference on 1 or 2 of the repeaters, but they're still usable, then you can set the preference level on those repeaters to, anything, 7, 8, 9, or 10. And what that will do is it will always use the first 4 repeaters for voice calls until those 4 repeaters are busy, and then it will allocate slots to these repeaters with a lower preference level. But if there's no interference issues on site, you can leave the preference level as 1 on all of the repeaters. That means the rest channel should cycle through from top to bottom through all of the available repeaters. And then you've got your TX and RH section where you enter your frequencies, you set your power level, and that is basically it for the peer repeater. Next, we'll look at the master repeater setup. So here we have the master repeater profile. If we do the same and we go through the general settings first, you can see I've called my master repeater just master. It has a unique radio ID, and the timers are the same as in my peer repeater. Power levels are the same, and everything else you can leave as default. If we look under the network settings, you will see that the master repeater IP address is 192.168.1.2, and we saw this in the peer repeater where we referenced the master repeater from there. The gateway IP address will be the same in all the repeaters, and so will be the subnet mask. If we look at the link establishment, so this repeater will be set as a master under the link type. And remember, there's only one master repeater in a capacity plus system or any other motor turbo system. And because this is the master repeater IP address will be repeated in this section, and also the master UDP port. So you'll have the master UDP port and its own UDP port twice. And if we look at the capacity plus section here, you will see that the beacon duration, the beacon interval, the rest channel IP and the rest channel UDP port are exactly the same as it was in the peer repeater, and this will be the same for all of the repeaters in the site. And if we look at the channel setup, again, there's a capacity plus channel added here. Here you can see I called it channel 1+2. You set the color code, and here you can see the channel ID is now 1 and 2. So this is the master repeater. It's the first repeater in the system, and therefore it will have the channel ID as 1 and 2. The preference level is set to 1, as it is with all the other repeaters in the system. And then just again your frequencies, your power level, and that's it done for the master repeater. Next, we will look at the subscriber code plugs. So here we have the subscriber code plug. This is for a DP4800E. And there's a few more things you need to set up in the subscriber code plug, as it is with most of these systems. So if we look under general settings, radio alias is just the standard Motorola. You can call this anything you want. And then radio ID, I've set mine to 101. My range will go up 102, 103, 104, etc. But you can make this, anything you like within reason. And the troubleshooting exercise from earlier said that the radio in that slide wasn't able to connect to the capacity plus system. So for those of you that didn't spot the mistake, the radio ID was some long number starting with an 8, and it had about 8 characters. And that was the problem. So in Capacity Plus, if you look under the help section, you can see that the maximum ID for a Capacity Plus system is 65535. If this was a non-Capacity Plus system, you can have an ID of 16776415, and the troubleshooting exercise, the ID that was used there might have worked unless it was 86 million or something. But as long as you stay within the parameters here, then you should be fine. For Capacity Plus though, the maximum ID, or the biggest ID you can use, is 65535. So just remember that when you set up a system. The rest of the fields you can leave as standard unless you need to change them for some reason, but leaving them default will work just fine. There is no setup to do in the networking because, again, all of the networking is handled by the repeaters themselves. Next, we need to add some contacts. And as you can see, I've got quite a few contacts in my contact list. You need to add them as Capacity Plus contacts. So when you add a new contact, make sure not to add them as a digital contact, but as a Capacity Plus contact. And give it a call ID as usual. And you can see my call IDs just follow one another. And then if we look at the RX group list, look at the Capacity Plus. So there's the Capacity Plus RX group list, and they correspond with what we've got under our contacts. So this is set up in the same way as any conventional system, but the only difference is instead of using the digital RX group list and the digital contacts, you will only be using Capacity Plus RX group list and Capacity Plus contacts. So it's exactly the same otherwise. So now if we look under the channel zone, remember that all of the channels will be added into the channel pool. So if we look at the channel pool, you can see that we've got 6 repeaters or 6 channels added in our channel pool. And you add them as Capacity Plus channels because this is a Capacity Plus system. And if we go into one of the channels, so this will be the master. Very simple, you give it a name, make sure the color code is the same as what it said in the repeater code plug. and make sure that the frequencies correspond. And apart from that, there's nothing else you need to set up. So add all of your channels in the channel pool, and then once you've done that, you can then look at the Capacity Plus voice list. So once you add channels in your channel pool, they will appear in the available section here. You need to then add them as members of the system. And because I've called mine, Capacity Plus 1, plus 2, 3, plus 4, and so on, you can see why it's now easy to match it up with the IDs on the right-hand side. If you call it something like channel 1, channel 2, channel 3, it will still be fairly clear, but if you give it, names of different departments or so on, then you could quite easily get it wrong, which is why I always advise to do it this way, because then you can add them very easily and quickly in the right order. And as you can see, all 6 of the repeaters have been added, and they all match up with the IDs on the right-hand side. And then you'll know that, when it comes to allocation of your channels, it will work properly. If, for instance, you had, channel 11 plus 12 in the first section here, and you've had them all jumbled up in different orders, then the system just wouldn't work at all. And that's an easy mistake to make, so it's something to look out for. So once you've added the members in your voice list, now you can go into your channel zone and set up your different channels. So you can see I've got quite a few channels here, all Capacity Plus. So if we go into the first channel, you've got your channel name, everything else is standard, and then this is the voice list part that I spoke about earlier. So if you look at the drop-down box, you can see there's only one voice list, because under my Capacity Plus voice list, there is only one voice list. If I had more than one system in my setup, then there would have been multiple voice lists in here. You need to make sure that you reference the correct voice list for this channel. You can see if you select none, it comes up in red, and it won't actually let you program the radio. So you have to select a voice list, just make sure it's the correct one. And then the beacon interval, you can see, corresponds with the beacon interval of the repeaters. It's always a good idea to keep them all the same. And the reason you have a beacon interval in a subscriber radio is if the subscriber does not get the beacon from any of the repeaters in the system, it will then do an active search, which means the radio will then try and wake up any of the repeaters in the voice list. But generally, once you switch the radio on, it should receive the beacon within 2 seconds from the repeater or the best channel, and your radio should be connected to the system. And in the bottom section here, you can see, obviously, since you've added your channels in the channel pool, there's no space to put your frequencies because they've already been added. And it's just a case of selecting a contact name and a group list. So you can have multiple different channels with multiple contact names and groups. Because you're not tied to a certain slot or frequency, it will all come from the channel pool. And as long as you have different contact names and group lists, then you can have as many as you like. The admit criteria, as you can see, you cannot select always. You can't select always in an IP site connect system or any other conventional system, but in tier 2 systems, so in any of the trunking systems, you cannot select this as always. It won't let you be impolite. So you can select either channel free or color code free. But if we look at one of the other channels, you will see that it's set up exactly the same. So you've got the same voice list, the beacon interval is the same, everything is the same apart from the contact name in the group list. So it's actually very easy to add extra channels into a Capacity Plus subscriber because everything is the same. The only thing you'll change is the RX group list and the contact name. And apart from that, that is basically what you need to set up to get a Capacity Plus system going. I hope this was useful, and hopefully after watching this you should be able to set up a Capacity Plus system on your own. If you have any questions or you're struggling a bit, please do get in touch and I will see where I can help you. Thank you very much and see you next time.